Machado de Assis is considered one of the, if not the best Brazilian writer of all time. Reading Dom Casmurro was practically an obligation in Brazilian schools and I had to do it 3 times. But honestly, I hated that book. Rereading it made me hate it even more because, surprise, if you force a kid to read a book just because it's famous, it may backfire. It took me years to get interested in his other works, after by chance I saw a movie based on another of his books, Posthumous Memoirs of Brás Cubas, Memórias Póstumas de Brás Cubas. After that, I got interested in his books again, and now it's time to tackle his short stories. How did they fare? Midnight Stories is a collection of 6 short stories published between 1870 and 1873 in the family newspaper. Said short stories are The Blue Parasite, The Wedding of Luis Duarte, Ernesto of Such, Dawn Without the Day, The Golden Watch, and Point of View. Each short story depicts a different theme, although it deals with families, relationships, and romances in a light but biting and sarcastic way. A cursory glance indicates that the expression Midnight Stories used to mean fake stories, the kind that you talk about in a bar, but I still need confirmation on that. On the Coherence, I've read lots of writers, including obviously many Brazilian writers, and by the knee bones of tap dancing Jesus, I say that Machado de Assis is a genius. This isn't just for the sake of theatrical exaggeration, I'm serious, he utterly floored me. These short stories were originally meant to be published in a newspaper, so he had to be precise, in a concise style of surgical precision. No line could be wasted, yet it had to be A. interesting to read, B. the description had to be striking so it stays with the reader, and C. in a good engaging story. And he absolutely aced all 3. Machado describes the characters as such as it's currently needed, sometimes withholding said descriptions to later moments in order to make a more compelling narrative, and or how one character's appearance influences another. He may not describe a woman's face till it's time for her betrothed to remember her gorgeous green eyes, or how someone is bothered by a gentleman's weird mustache. Said descriptions aren't simplistic either, each one have an artistic alluring style. While not as striking and raw as Clarice Lispector or as beautiful as Robert Howard, it's witty, it's biting, it's funny and subtle, and can easily dab into said raw emotion or beautiful descriptions as needed, showing his amazing control of the written language. Using the house analogy from my other reviews, Machado builds a house, a simple but solid house. Some bits and tweaks are actually quite nice to look at, but what's important is what lies past its door and windows. It's one of those styles that I can't properly describe, you have to read it. For the cohesion, all of the stories in the book can be considered short stories, even though they are split through numerous chapters, and all of them are told in a straightforward third-person narrative. There aren't any jumps in time, narrative switches or anything of the sort, so most of them are quite easy to read. Normally, this would also be the section where I talk about immersion, but this will be moved to the characterization, since his stories here are carried by his characters and their interactions, everything seasoned by a lot of wit and barbs towards every single aspect of societal norms. There aren't any grand schemes to conquer the world, at least in this book. Most of the character impressions are brief, although their repercussions may last longer. While most authors go to the bare-bones route whenever forced to work with limited space, Machado uses the utilitarian design to play with the cohesion of his stories. For example, he can set expectations to subvert them in 3 paragraphs or less, or start a story about a small squabble only to suddenly yank to another theme, but it never feels off. Speaking of themes, the themes in this book are mostly about societal exchanges and relations, though made subtle to the point one can read a full story without realizing it also has a societal commentary. Machado rarely, if ever, goes full ham-fisted, which is a treat for readers like me. And most of his criticisms are hidden in small but witty jabs here and there. His themes are worked through familial or personal stories of specific peoples or groups. For example, A family dinner commemorating the marriage of the older daughter of the family reveals the expectations of each person, culminating in the fact that the father of the family just wanted a single specific person to visit the dinner so he could show off, meaning that social status is far more important to him than his daughter's marriage. All sorts of societal connections and norms are criticized, from simple expectations and yearnings to more taboo and serious issues rarely brought upon at the time. For example, marital abuse or how poorly women were treated in their marriages. A husband comes home to find a gift, and his reaction is to physically and mentally abuse his wife, ordering her to tell him who sent that gift. Making things worse, the father of the abused woman visits for dinner, sees that there is something wrong and thinks that she did something to her husband. By the scathing tone describing their actions, it's obvious, at least to me, that this was a less than veiled criticism. There is also an interesting clash of romantic ideas versus realism. Many characters in this book expect something fairy tale-like, or behave as if they have a grand destiny to be fulfilled, constantly referencing things they saw in their romance novels, only to be met with scorn from the whole society and given a reality check. The first story, The Blue Parasite, for example, is about the protagonist's romantic ideals towards an European countess, to the point he is ignoring how pleasant and interesting it is to be in his home city, and when he finally comes about, his next biggest obstacle is the romantic ideals of another person. It never gets to the point of being mean-spirited, since it's not the romanticism itself being criticized, but rather the indulgence in it being detrimental to one's reality. In the end, the themes can be in-depth and quite complex, especially for such a brief stories. But folks who are more used to blunt metaphors and more ham-fisted approaches may either need to read it 2 or 3 times, there is no shame in it, or risk missing some content altogether. These stories are fertile ground for discussion, which, considering Machado's style, was intentional. Lastly, in the characterization, these stories were written more than 100 years ago, yet I know people like the characters I've seen in these pages. It's less about how they talk and more about their behavior. We all know an overdramatic friend, or a person who thinks he is the best thing since sliced bread, and will have an ungodly fit if you so much honestly positively criticize what they do, or the bitchy friend who only talks through backhanded comments, even if they mean well. And they all show up here. What's the best, at least for me, is that Machado often aims for realism in a pleasant way, so the amount of completely irredeemable characters, or worse, asshole, is very, very low. And by writing such real people and their interactions, the characters and their conversations are the main source of immersion within these stories. The dialogues are snappy, not necessarily brief, but basically devoid of pompous filler, even if someone's being overly dramatic. And thus it feels like how two people would normally talk with each other. There's even the ancient letter equivalent of text me as soon as you read this. It's honestly quite hard to write about the witty dialogues without spoiling anything, because there are really subtle pulls and sways of characters convincing each other, making jokes at each other, or suddenly realizing they stepped on a verbal landmine. Come on, who doesn't make a faux pas from time to time? And immediately trying to excuse themselves and more. All this is done through speech patterns and mannerisms during dialogues. Remember, surgical descriptions. As for the final thoughts, would I recommend it? Absolutely, no wonder he's so celebrated in Brazilian literature. I honestly wish I learned about Machado de Assis through these stories rather than his main novel, and I think that anyone who wants to learn about him can, without any problem, start through these short stories. Well, that's all for today, thank you very much, and see you all next time. Remember to like and subscribe.